Good evening and welcome to our 10 talks, 10 commandments, 10 speakers, and hopefully just 1 hour. When God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai over 3,300 years ago, the Jewish people stood around the mountain, it says, as one, Ke'ish Echad, Belev Echad, as one person with one heart in complete unity. This year, however, for the very first time, many synagogues will not be able to hold a reading of the 10 commandments. So we have to find a different way to connect. But in addition to the communal aspect of the 10 commandments, there's also a personal and individual element in our connection with God and the Torah. Each in his or her unique way, on their own level, finding an aspect which is relevant to them, where they are in life at this moment. And this is reflected in the first commandment, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord, your God, in the singular. And the 10 commandments are not just multifaceted with layers upon layers of meaning and understanding, but they are also timeless. And tonight we have the privilege to hear from 10 different voices from a diverse background, each sharing their knowledge and experience, some from literally around the corner, and others from across the globe, all the way from Australia, Hong Kong, the United States, South Africa, and Israel. We could spend a whole hour listening to each of them, but time is limited, and I would like to thank each and every speaker for their time and willingness to share, and wish them all success and blessing in their lives. And thank you all for joining us, and I wish you all a Chag Sameach, and look forward to seeing you soon in person. Enjoy.
Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hoitzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeis avodim.
David Weiss is an American writer and lecturer. He is a screenwriter of films including All Dogs Go to Heaven, the Rugrats movie, Shrek 2, Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, and the Smurfs.
Hi, I'm David N. Weiss, screenwriter from Hollywood, California. So happy to be joining you all. Let's talk tonight about the first commandment. I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. It all starts there. I got into this business because I was a nervous kid who needed attention. I needed to know that there was a reason to be on the earth, and when I was growing up, I didn't really understand anything about faith or God or religion. I just discovered very early on that if I was putting on a show and people were laughing, I felt better about the fact that I didn't know why I was here. And things that were overwhelming, like the fact that life went on for infinity in the universe, but I myself was finite, that frightened me. The whole fear of death thing was big for me as a kid. So I discovered that when I was putting on a show, I felt happy and I felt great. The problem was you can't always put on a show, at least not without getting thrown out of school. And also the audience doesn't always like the show, and you don't have control whether you'll get the part, and it was just too unpredictable, and I found myself getting more and more nervous and more anxious. And then later I discovered the teachings of Rabbi Tursky, who was a renowned expert in recovery and in addictions, and I had a lot of friends in Hollywood who suffered with various dependencies. So I learned more about that, and sure enough, the number one way to recover according to the 12-step programs is to start also with the first commandment, which is you got to acknowledge you have a higher power. I'm overwhelmed, and that part was easy for me. That's the first step in recovery. And the second step is I came to believe in a power greater than myself that could help restore me to sanity. What is it about leading me out of the land of Egypt? What does Mitzrayim mean anyway? It means a constriction or a narrowness. But God came with the first commandment to remind us, hey, I'm not just a God that's out there in space. I'm the God that actually reached into a nation and pulled another nation out through signs and wonders and miracles and relieved you and released you from the house of bondage. And all of us are in some sort of a bondage. I was in bondage to my fear. I would wake up every morning just terrified of, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to write something that's going to sell, or that the boss is going to like, or that's going to get my family fed. And then I had to look inside and go, wait a second. I claim that there's a God, and yet I don't trust in him. And our sages were very wise about that. In the Aleinu prayer, which we say at the end of all the davening, there's a beautiful little passage that sounds very much like a verse from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It says, you shall know this day that I am God, and you shall take it and put it in your heart. Take it and put it in your heart. So how do I start my day? I start my day with the Moda Ani. Modeh. And I have to really work because I'm waking up. I haven't had my coffee yet. This is the first thing we say before we get out of bed. Modeh. Give thanks. Ani will I. Give thanks will I. I will give thanks. Modeh ani lefanecha. To before you. To you. I will give thanks to you. And then I envision seeing God in the room. Not really seeing him, but sensing his presence. There's a powerful, powerful force here. The most powerful force. The creator of the entire universe is here with me, waiting for me to get out of bed. Living and eternal king. I said king who is living and eternal. Okay? King who is living and eternal. My goodness, that's a lot of power. Why? For you have restored my soul within me. Now, when I get to that part, I actually flex I get my toes going, I get a little crunchier, and I imagine my soul is coming in me. My soul is coming back in me. God is renewing my contract. Get a little abs going here, a little crunch, because I can feel my soul and feel it coming in. This is hard work, and I don't get out of bed until I believe it's actually happening. Then I say, why did you do this? My soul is coming back. You've placed my soul within me. How? Bechemla. With compassion. Whatever's going on today, no matter how hard this day is, you know what's coming. Nothing surprising. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming for Dave. Oh, he's so messed up today because this is beyond me. No, he's got it all covered. He knows that no matter how hard my day is, he's ready for me, and he knows that this is the most compassionate thing that could happen, is to give me this day. Not the day I wished for, not the day I wanted, this day. Right? Bechemla rabba emunatecha. Great is your faith in me. He gave me this day with compassion because he knows I can do it. Oh my God, that takes a lot of weight off. And now I can go back into Hollywood and do my best and not worry about the results because he's in charge of the results. Wow. Moda ani lefanecha melechai vikayam shehekazar bi nishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha. And now I can get out of bed because I believe it. Of course, within a couple of minutes, I forget all about it, and then I'm a nervous wreck again. But I can get back to this moment really easily because of the first commandment. Take a step. Believe in God. Try that. And then trust in God. Say the Moda Ani. Don't get out of bed until you feel it. And see if it doesn't turn your life around. Happy Shavuos.
לא יהיה לך אלוהים אחרים על פניי, לא ישסה לחפש אל בכל תמונה אשר בשמיים ממעל ואשר בארץ מתחת ואשר במים מתחת לארץ, לא ישתחווה אלוהם ולא יסעבדם, כי אנוכי אדוני אלוהיך אלקנה פקד עוון אבויס על בונים על שלישים ועל רבעים לשונאי ואיזה חסד לאלפים לא יהווי ולשמרי מצווסוי.
Mrs. TOVA Mordechai, formerly an evangelical minister, is the author of her acclaimed autobiography, To Play with Fire. She resides in Sfat, Israel, with her husband and 3 sons. Born the daughter of an Egyptian Jewish mother and a British Protestant evangelical father, TOVA presents the powerful real-life account of her tumultuous journey to Judaism as she grapples with Christianity and finds freedom in her Jewish roots.
You shall have no other gods before me. A story is told in the Talmud that non-believers came to the sages in Rome and asked, if God hates idolatry so much, why does he not remove the idols from the world? The rabbis replied that if the idolaters only served gods of wood and stone, gold or silver, then surely God would remove them from the world. But because they also make gods from cosmic bodies such as sun, moon, and stars, God will not destroy these bodies on behalf of those who choose to serve them as gods. The non-believers persisted and asked, so why does God not destroy just the idols of wood and stone and gold and silver? To which the rabbis explained that then those individuals who serve the sun, the moon, and the stars would say, see, our gods remain, so our gods are stronger than yours. God clearly does not want idols. He wants to give man free choice to choose. Judaism teaches us that God wants people to choose him of their own free will and choose right over wrong, good over evil. God wants us to choose life. The Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, says, why are idols called other gods? He writes other comes from the Hebrew word acharayim, meaning hinder parts, from God's external will. explaining that God creates these idols solely that men should have free choice and be able to choose emet, truth. God promises that in the future, in the time of Mashiach, he will remove the power of impurity from the world. He will remove idols. The Rambam teaches us that on Mount Sinai, God gave 613 commandments, which he taught to Moses over a period of 40 days. The gematria of Torah is 611. So what are the additional two? The additional two are the first and second commandments that God himself spoke to us directly. I am the Lord your God is the foundation of 248 positive commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. All of the 365 negative commandments are derived from this second commandment. The Rambam tells us that idolatry came into the world in the time of Enosh before the flood. People at that time believed that since God created the sun, the moon, and the stars, which give us warmth and light and direction, and since they are fulfilling the will of God, we should thank them directly for the good that they bestow upon us. This, they reasoned, is similar to a king of flesh and blood appointing a minister over a city or a province to execute his will. The Shrach HaKodesh, Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz from the 1600s, explains that God is different from all other kings. God is omnipresent. He is in all places, at all times, and therefore needs no ministers to represent him. The sun, the moon, and the stars are merely like a hatchet that the woodchopper holds to chop down a tree, or the hammer that the carpenter uses to bang in a nail. They have no power of their own. Kabbalah teaches us that each time we perform one of the 248 positive commandments, such as lighting Shabbat candles, eating kosher food, or giving charity, new blessing, new light, and new vitality come into the world. And every time we hold back, each time we negate and resist, and do not allow ourselves to transgress a negative commandment, such as we don't steal, or we don't eat the cheeseburger, or we don't turn a light on Shabbat, or we refrain from speaking badly of others. At that moment, God destroys negative powers in the world. God removes impurity from the world, and he eradicates powers of evil. There is an additional plus when we hold ourselves back from transgressing a negative commandment. In the space of the impurity that God removes, that area reveals an even greater light, a greater illumination of God's light. In our prayers each day, we say that God has not made us like the nations of the world, nor has he assigned to us a portion like the families of the earth, for they bow to vanity and nothingness. But we bend the knee, and we bow down, and we offer praise to the Supreme King of Kings, who stretches forth the heavens and establishes the earth. I have truly lived through this. I gave 25 years of my life, my years of strength and purpose, and ended up with a void, a chasm so deep. So many times I'm asked, why did I spend 9 years in a closed commune, fasting 3, 5, even 8 consecutive days, eating burnt or moldy food, living a life of semi-abstination, semi-seclusion and abstinence? The answer is simply that I truly believed that this was a path to God, to truth. The God I was raised with, I could hold in my hand. He gave me nothing, neither did he hear or answer my prayers. People can choose to serve many gods, such as materialism or power, but the void remains the same. Only when I began to pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even in a place of abomination, he heard my prayers, and he brought me home to a life of completeness, purpose, and light. One day, in our Torah class, our rabbi asked us, how do we serve God more? By performing a positive commandment, or abstaining from performing a negative commandment? We all thought that we would serve God in a greater capacity by performing a positive commandment, but our teacher explained, no. When we perform a positive commandment, it can only be as big as our individual capacity, but when we abstain from performing a negative commandment, it is as big as God's capacity. The world surely needs a huge dose now of this warm, healing, illuminating, positive light. We surely can do our part in order for God to reveal it.
לא יסיסו שם אדינוי אלוהיך לשוב, כי לא ינקה אדינוי איז אשר יישא שמוי לשוב.
Rabbi Levi Sudak and his wife Fagi have been the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Shluchim to Edgware since 1986. He is the director of Lubavitch of Edgware and a member of the Directorate of Lubavitch UK, as well as an executive member of the Initiation Society. Rabbi Sudak was educated first in London, then in Israel, Argentina and the USA. He is recipient of the Chief Rabbinate Award for Excellence for Outstanding Professional Youth and Student Work from Chief Rabbi Sachs.
The third of the Ten Commandments is of two parts. First it says, do not raise God's name in vain. And then it says, because God will not forgive the person who raises his name falsely. So, we have one thing to not swear falsely by God's name. That's a transgression. That's the second transgression. But the first one, which says in vain, teaches us that we may not mention God's name in vain. And that is why we have, instead of saying God's name, we say Hashem. The great name is what Hashem means, without saying the name. There are actually 7 names of God which we may not say in vain, and likewise we may not write them in vain. So when we write God's name, it is customary to write G-D. And when we write the Hebrew names, we also make a space between the Hebrew names. Later on in the Torah, we learn that we may not desecrate a written script of God's name. And this is in the Seder of Akev in the book of Deuteronomy, where we are instructed to destroy the places of idol worship. Then the Torah says, do not do so to God your God, from which we learn that we may not erase God's name. A scribe who's writing in the Torah, if he has a mistake, he's allowed to erase and then rewrite. However, if he has started one of God's names and written the first 2 letters, he may no longer erase. He has to cut out that piece of parchment upon which God's name is written, stick a piece of parchment behind the cutout, and rewrite God's name in its place. May we always remember to uphold God's name. Thank you.
זכור אז יום השבוס לקדשוי, 6 ימים תבואי, ועשיסו כל מלאכתך ויום השביעי, שבוס לאדוני אלוהיך, לא יעשה כל מלאכתו בנך וביתך, עבדך ומסך ובהמתך, וגרך שבשעריך, כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמים ואת הארץ, את היום ואת כל אשר בם, וינח ביום השביעי, על כן בירך אדוני את יום השבוס, ויקדשהו.
Professor EFRAIM KRAMER has passionately been involved in emergency medicine for 30 years, including involvement in mass gathering medicine, which resulted in him being called up for duty for the FIFA World Cups 2010 and 2014. Since then, he has been actively involved with FIFA Medical in helping to establish international standards for football medical services, particularly in the prevention and management of sudden cardiac arrest on the football field. He is also involved in disaster medicine and has been actively involved in urban search and rescue missions to earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, floods, and volcanoes.
Greetings from Johannesburg in South Africa. How does a person who is in charge of the medical services for a FIFA World Cup, such as in Brazil in 2014, keep Sabbath? How do you take the day that is filled with rest, the delight, you honor it, you refrain from pursuing all your normal affairs, and how do you do that in the middle of a World Cup? I was sent to a city called Manaus, which is the middle of the Amazon jungle. It was a match that was going to happen on Motzei Shabbos between England and Italy. And I went there to have a look at the medical services to make sure that everything would be in order because of the fact that it was hot, it was humid, and we're worried about various medical problems. I arrive on the Friday morning, I go and check into my hotel, and then from my hotel I go with my host for the event, Eduardo, and we go to the stadium to go and look at everything in the stadium and check everything out. And I said to Eduardo, after we had checked out the stadium, I have a bit of a problem. I'm not going to sleep in the hotel, I'm going to sleep in the stadium. I will spend the night and Saturday in the medical room in the stadium. What's wrong with the hotel, he says. I said, nothing with the hotel, it has to do with the Sabbath. You see, there's a lot of forms of work that we can't do on the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. It's a day which is special. And I give him about a 20-minute drosha on Shabbos and what we can do and what we should do and what we're not allowed to do. And I said to him, it's very difficult because when the Sabbath comes out, there's not enough time for me to come from the hotel and go through the traffic and go through security and get to the medical and make sure everything's in place before the match actually starts. So I really would like to be in the stadium when the Sabbath ends, because very soon after that the match is going to start. So I'll sleep in the medical room. There's an ambulance stretcher and there's no problem. He was not a happy man. He said, you've got to understand that the teams will come, they will practice, and when they go tonight, we switch off the lights, we switch off the air conditioning, it is hot here, it is humid. You're not a Brazilian, you don't understand this kind of thing. You're not used to this kind of climate. I said, don't you worry, I'm from Africa, we'll make a plan. So he realized that he wasn't going to change anything, he wasn't going to dissuade me, and so I came back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I moved into the medical room, and I made myself comfortable, and I spent Shabbos in the medical room, and the night came, and the lights stayed on, and the air conditioning seemed to be okay, and eventually I lay down, and I went to sleep. Woke up the next morning, finished davening, Eduardo walks in at 8 o'clock, and the first thing he says is, were you okay? Did you sleep? Did you manage? I said, I'm perfect. I know what you're worried about. I said, the lights in fact stayed on. The air conditioning was fine. No problem at all. He says, I hope I didn't do the wrong thing. I said, what's the matter? He says, I hope I didn't mess up your Sabbath by doing things I shouldn't have done. I said, Eduardo, what are you talking about? He says, well, I was worried about you. So I went to see the stadium engineer. And I said to the stadium engineer that he's a Jewish doctor from South Africa, and because of his Sabbath, he's going to be sleeping in the stadium tonight and tomorrow. The first question he said, what's wrong with the hotel? I said, no, nothing wrong with the hotel. It's his Sabbath. And I gave him a whole rundown of what you told me about the fact that because of the Sabbath and what the work you can't do, and you're going to sleep in the stadium. And even if the lights are off, and even if the air conditioning off, and even if it's hot, and even if it's humid, you're determined you're going to spend the Sabbath in the stadium. So this is what he said. He said that if the Sabbath is so important to this Jewish doctor, then he's going to spend the time in the stadium, lights on, lights off, air conditioning on, air conditioning off. We will leave the lights of the entire stadium on the whole night. And we will leave the air conditioning on in the entire stadium on the whole night. And that night, that Shabbos, never before and never again, because of one Yid who wanted to keep Shabbos and therefore wanted to stay in the stadium because that's how I could keep Shabbos, he left the lights on in the stadium the entire night. The whole stadium burned. And the air conditioning likewise. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, what you're involved in, Shabbos and Shabbos. And you've got to make a plan for Shabbos. And it's amazing how many people around you, when they understand what you're doing, they understand why you're doing it, will actually help you keep Shabbos.
כבד es avicha v'esimecha leman yerichun yomecha al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noisen eloch.
Mrs. Goldie Avdson, together with her husband, has been the director of Chabad of China and the Far East for 35 years. She spearheaded the establishment of the Carmel Jewish Day School in Hong Kong and continues to run a dynamic Chabad center catering to all ages, across the Jewish spectrum, and reaching out to provide for impoverished locals. Goldie was the keynote speaker at the annual Chabad Women's Conference for over 3,000 Rebbetzins and is a proud mother and grandmother.
Enjoying it thus far. I've been asked to speak about the fifth commandment, Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and mother. Seems as if it's been a challenge for quite a while, at least since the giving of the Torah. Let's talk about this for a minute. Why do children have such a hard time respecting their parents? And why is it becoming increasingly difficult to parent children these days? You look in any bookstore, you'll see there are shelves and shelves and books and endless titles of how to parent children in the 21st century. Wendy Mogul, in her book, Blessing of a Skinny, says that she thinks the reason children have a hard time respecting their parents is because parents are having a hard time expecting that respect. Parents are finding it rigid, a little bit old-fashioned, or not so friendly to expect their children to treat them differently than other people. And therefore they become their friends. But she says children don't need 2 more friends that are 6 feet tall. They have enough friends their height that will always be way cooler than we can ever be. She says children need someone to look up to. Maybe that's why we are actually taller than our children. And she says by not demanding our respect and not teaching children to respect us, we are actually denying them the blessing of having someone to look up to. So how can we teach our children to respect us, their parents? Well, there is a philosophical answer and there's a practical answer. Many years ago, thousands of years ago, our sages gave us many guidelines of what children may or may not do in order to garner that respect. For example, children may not call their parents by their first name. Children may not sit in the seat of their parents. Children must stand up when their parents walk into their room. They need to respect their privacy. They may not disagree with them in public, and when doing so in private, there are certain ways to do it. All ways in which children learn that their parents are different than other people. There's another way to garner the respect of your children, and that's by being an example. We all know that children will do what they see and not so much what they are told. And we read about this every day in our prayers, actually 3 times a day at least, when we read the Shema. In the second paragraph, Ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, it continues to tell us that when we teach our children, Vishinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, and we want them to follow in our ways, we need to set an example. When? Always. B'shiftecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech. When we sit in our homes and when we go on our way. B'shachbecha u'v'kumecha. When we lay down and when we get up. 24/7, our children are watching us. And when they see us behave in a way that earns respect, they automatically will respect us. And if we feel a little bit uncomfortable with putting ourselves on a pedestal, we just need to remember that in every child there are 3 partners: the mother, the father, and God himself. So when you partner with God in something, that earns you a little bit of respect. And when we remember that, and we know that we have been given the charge of bringing up these children together with God's blessings, then we can feel a little bit more comfortable with putting ourselves on that pedestal of parenthood. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, we also ran a parenting discussion online. It was in Hebrew. So we were looking for the word for parenting in Hebrew. It didn't really seem that it existed in that form. Parents, yes, but parenting as a verb, not really. And then I found out that actually parenting as a verb in English is also a new thing. Because actually, as parents, it's not something that we do. It's something that we are. And if it's something that we are, then it's a 24/7 occupation. So when we remember that we are here to educate our children, to set an example for our children, then we will earn that respect. And we can therefore even demand it and expect it from our children. Wishing you all a very happy Shavuot and a Chag Sameach.
Panic QC is one of the UK's most highly regarded advocates and crossbencher in the House of Lords. He practices mainly in the areas of public law and human rights. He has argued cases before the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, the Appellate Committee of the House of Lords, the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights.
Thou shalt not kill. It's not surprising that Hashem should include this as one of his top 10 commandments. No civilized society could operate without such a principle. We all know, we all respect that we can't murder someone else for financial gain or as an act of spite or an act of revenge. But all rules, including the 10 Commandments, and particularly this one, raise questions about their application in hard cases. The book of Exodus tells us that when there were hard cases, the judges brought them to Moses. And I wonder how Moses would have decided 3 particularly hard cases which the English courts have addressed relating to this commandment. The first of them is the case of the conjoined Siamese twins, Jody and Mary, which came before the Court of Appeal in the year 2000. Without surgery, they would both die, and soon. But if the surgeons operated on the twins, Jody had a good quality life in front of her, but Mary would inevitably die. The Court of Appeal asked itself a very difficult question. Can we kill Mary in order to save Jody? The Court of Appeal's answer was yes. Yes, because it was the least bad option and because Mary was a fatal threat to Jody's life. The second case is one that all law students are taught in their first year of studies. The case of the Queen against Dudley and Stevens in 1884. There's a shipwreck. 4 men are in a small boat in the South Atlantic. They're 1,000 kilometres from land. They have no prospect of rescue and they have no food and no drink. One of the 4 is the cabin boy, Richard Parker, and he's in a coma as a result of the problems. The other 3 men are conscious, and 2 of them, Dudley and Stevens, decide that it would be better if some of them survive than for them all to die. So they decide they're going to kill the unfortunate cabin boy Parker, and all 3 of those who remain, Dudley and Stevens and the 4th man, Brooks, they feed on Richard Parker's body. Miraculously, they are rescued. Dudley and Stevens are prosecuted for murder. The 4th man, Brooks, is not prosecuted because he played a much lesser role in the killing. The court in London decides that necessity is no defence to this act of murder. The men, Dudley and Stevens, are sentenced to death, although their sentence happily is commuted and they only serve 6 months in prison. The third case is the case of Noel Conway, a client of mine in the Supreme Court in 2018. He suffered from motor neurone disease. He had ever decreasing autonomy over his bodily functions. He wanted his life to end with dignity. So he asked the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom to rule that when he had less than 6 months to live, a medical professional could provide him with medication which would enable him, by pressing a button, to end his life. He argued that if the law allows someone, and it does, to commit suicide, suicide ceased to be unlawful in this country in 1961, it can't be unlawful for a person who lacks the ability, the capacity to kill himself, to ask another willing volunteer to assist his suicide when he suffers from a debilitating and terminal illness. The courts, the Supreme Court, said no. And they said no because assisting another person to commit a suicide is a crime. And it's a matter for Parliament to decide whether or not to change that law. These and many other difficult cases raise profound dilemmas of law and morality, and sometimes of science. Thou shalt not kill is a principle that we all understand and respect and value, but sometimes we need carefully to consider what killing means. Thank you.
Mrs. Rivka Slonim is the Education Director at Rohr Chabad Center for Jewish Life and a lecturer on Jewish medical ethics at Binghamton University. A self-described Hasidic feminist, she lectures internationally on the intersection of Jewish observance and contemporary life, with a special focus on Jewish women. She is the editor of Total Immersion, a mikveh anthology, and a Bread and Fire, an anthology on Jewish women's spirituality.
Hi friends. One of the really instructive things about the Ten Commandments is the fact that it was given by God on not one large tablet, but 2 tablets, made of sapphire stone, I might add. On one were engraved 5 commandments, and on the other, the latter 5. As such, the commandments can be read either in vertical fashion, from 1 to 5, and then 6 through 10, or they can be read horizontally. In the horizontal model, the 2nd and 7th commandment would be read consecutively. Do not have other gods. Do not commit adultery. Which means there has to be some connection between these 2 commandments. And indeed, there is. They both prohibit a breach of exclusivity in a relationship. Idol worship is essentially a dalliance with another. We are, as highlighted in the Song of Songs, in a spousal relationship with God. As such, worship of anything other than God is an infidelity. It is conceptually adultery. And then, of course, there is sexual immorality as prohibited in the 7th commandment. Now, at first glance, most postmodern, decent people might look at that and say, I don't think I have to worry about these 2 items. I most certainly don't serve idols. I'm way too sophisticated to bow down to a statue made of gold, silver, copper, or marble. And I would never violate my marital bonds. I might covet someone else's possessions. I might not honor my parents to the degree that I should, but idolatry and adultery, nah, that's not me. The Alter Rebbe, author of the Tanya, explains, however, that it's not so cut and dried. He teaches us that idolatry is not necessarily an outright denial of God. You could believe in God. It's rather a denial of God's oneness, of God's primacy, of God being the only and most important factor. Put simply, idolatry really is any time we prioritize something over God, anything other over God. Anytime we let an internal force like desire or laziness, or an external force like public opinion, obscure the will of God, this is a form of idol worship. Because serving God means there's no other force to which you are loyal. It doesn't matter if the action is large or small, extreme or subtle. A breach is a breach. And this allows us to understand adultery, to really understand it. Because likewise in our marital relationships, infidelity is not only when you sleep with your husband's brother. Granted, you wouldn't do that. But adultery, understood properly, means repudiating the essential oneness and the priority that is your relationship. It makes us ask ourselves, are there times when in small or even large ways we act in a fashion that disregards our spouse's will, or that is an act of disrespect? If you really love someone and you know it drives them crazy, for example, that the cover for the tube of the toothpaste is not replaced after using it. You know this and you still can't be bothered to do that for your spouse? That inaction, as slight as it might be, is a form of idolatry, a definite lack of loyalty and devotion. So this Shavuot, when we once again celebrate our marriage with God, because that's what Sinai was, let us commit and recommit to try as hard as we can to be more sensitive to the subtleties, to allow no fissure, no break, no crack, as small or as slight as it might seem, to compromise our relationships with our Creator and with our spouse. And that's what we call solid. Chag Sameach, Good Yom Tov.
Carl Wolf is a specialist criminal advocate with an emphasis on high-value fraud, serious violence, drug conspiracies and murder, many involving cross-border investigations involving both national police forces and Interpol. His work defending clients was featured as a part of a television documentary, which followed one of Scotland Yard's specialist crime units. Carl is also a regular contributor to a national newspaper where he writes an advice column specifically dealing with matters of criminal law.
Good evening. In the 1870s, theologist Charles Hodge wrote, "The doctrine of the divine right of property is the only security for the individual or for society, and it's only by making property sacred, guarded by the fiery sword of divine justice, that it can be saved from the dangers to which it is everywhere and always exposed." The eighth commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," seems straightforward on the surface. Most people will confidently declare, well, I haven't robbed a bank, so I'm pretty good on this one. However, it doesn't take a legal genius to realise that it goes further than bank robbery. Today we see fraud and theft flourishing on the internet and through social media. Cyberspace makes it easier to reach people, and that ease of access benefits people with evil intentions too. The definition of theft, drummed into every law student from day one of law school, is that theft occurs where someone dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. Theft, of course, can take many forms, including robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, receiving stolen goods, fraudulent business dealings, theft of reputation by libelous and defamatory statements, theft of ideas, and so on. Because of an increasingly complex and materialistic society, one might say that the definition of theft has become blurred. There seems to be a pervasive opinion amongst many people, especially the younger generation, that stealing is okay, as long as it's small, everyone does it and they can't see any immediate consequences. But do you have to be intentionally sinful to break both the law and the commandment? In The Wide Window, which is the third book from the children's series Lemony Snicket, A Series of Unfortunate Events, the author writes, "Stealing, of course, is a crime, and a very impolite thing to do, but like most impolite things, it is excusable under certain circumstances. Stealing is not excusable if, for instance, you're in a museum and you decide that a certain painting would look better in your house, and you grab the painting and take it home. But if you were very, very hungry and you had no way of obtaining money, it would be excusable to grab the painting, take it to your house and eat it." So what if you don't really think that what you're doing is theft? For example, employees who take stationery from their company, students who surf the internet and copy work from someone else to pass it off as their own, or people using file sharing sites for downloading music and films from the internet without paying for it. Often these things are thought to be okay because, well, everyone's doing it. In 1982, the Court of Appeal in a case called Gosh set out the test for dishonesty, especially in relation to offences of theft and fraud, and they asked two questions. Was the defendant's conduct dishonest by the ordinary standards of reasonable people? And if so, did the defendant actually appreciate or understand that their conduct was dishonest by those standards? It was widely acknowledged by many legal practitioners and academics that the second question created difficulty for juries. It's unsurprising, isn't it, that 12 people might have had a different idea of what conduct amounts to being dishonest. And in any event, they then had to go on and evaluate the actions of a defendant by the defendant's own perception of dishonesty. This meant that if the defendant did not consider their actions to be dishonest by the ordinary standards of reasonable people, then under the Gosh test, the defendant should have been found not guilty, and for the past 35 years, juries struggled with that type of objectivity. However, in 2017, the Supreme Court passed judgment in the civil case of Ivy, setting out a new test for dishonesty in civil litigation. And in 2020, in the case of Barton and Booth, the Supreme Court has recently confirmed that the Ivy test is now to be followed in criminal proceedings. And the Ivy test now asks these two questions. What was the defendant's actual state of knowledge or belief as to the facts at the time they acted? And secondly, was their conduct dishonest by the standards of ordinary decent people? Juries thus therefore now subjectively decide what was the defendant's genuine knowledge or belief at the time of the act. And if they can be sure what the defendant's knowledge or belief was, they then have to take that knowledge and belief and consider whether the conduct of the defendant was dishonest on an objective view of what ordinary decent people would think. There is no longer a requirement for the defendant to realise that their actions were in fact dishonest. This change in the law means that defendants are more likely to be found guilty of offences even when they genuinely believe that their actions were not dishonest. And this presents a much simpler formulation of the law, and it's likely that the prosecution will find it easier to prove their case to the jury, and for most people that's probably a good thing. This also clearly presents a shift away from the view that the individual's opinion is more important than the view of society's. The problem facing us today really isn't a new one. It's as old as the story of humanity itself. To take what does not belong to you is not only the cause of conflict between individuals, but has also been the reasons entire nations have gone to war. Stealing is clearly dishonest. Our thinking has grown fuzzy when it comes to honesty. Personal and public morality have been separated by many of the men and women who are opinion makers today. Of course, I admit there's always been corruption in leadership, but I challenge the thoughtful observer of contemporary history to point out a period of time when there has been a greater separation of personal and public morality than in recent years, and honesty is at the very heart of that morality. One might say that nothing is more fundamental and necessary to the survival of a society than the commandment not to steal. We all need basic honesty with each other and with ourselves, because without honesty, how can we as a society trust each other and work together to build a future for ourselves and our children? Thank you. Take care and stay healthy.
Daniel Barnett is one of the UK's leading employment law barristers. His clients range from the FTSE 100 companies through to David and Victoria Beckham's nanny. He is the author of 12 books on employment law. He is a regular speaker on the national and international lecture circuit and is best known for presenting the Legal Hour every week on LBC. Plus, he lives with his wife, Miranda, and 3 teenage children just a few doors away from the DUBRAWSKYs and the Lubavitch of Radlett.
Hello everyone, and can I just say a huge thank you to Rachel and SENDY DUBRAWSKY for everything they do for the community, everything they do to help their family, their friends, people they know, and for putting this series of mini talks together on behalf of everybody. I've been asked to talk about commandment number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. Now, the 9th commandment isn't just about telling the truth in general, but it's about telling the truth where it can often matter the most. In a court of law, where the state comes to ask a judge to imprison a member of society, or where people's disputes are resolved in a way that avoids combat and blood feuds. And of course, the rule of law is enshrined in most cultures, and the 9th commandment predates Magna Carta by at least 1500 years. We all know the old joke. Prosecutor: did you kill the victim? Defendant: no, I did not. Prosecutor: do you know what the penalties are for perjury? Defendant: yes, I do. And they're a heck of a lot better than the penalty for murder. And although that's quite amusing, you've also got to bear in mind that very often you can't be sure what the truth actually is. It's a massive oversimplification to say that in a court case, one side is lying and the other side's telling the truth. Life is a tapestry of subtlety and complications, and many people believe they're telling the truth even if others might disagree with them. Scientific studies have shown how unreliable witnesses can be. If they believe they're telling the truth about somebody driving at 50 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, is that lying? Is that bearing false witness? No, even though their witness evidence may technically be untrue. If you come to court, whether you're taking an oath or affirming, which means promising to tell the truth, you're promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We've all heard that oath on hundreds of courtroom dramas. But the laws of evidence make that impossible. Limitations on evidence, things like hearsay, things like rules on relevance. Lots of evidence is inadmissible, and judges often want bullet point summaries and not lengthy, convoluted explanations, which you might regard as incompatible with your oath to tell the whole truth. But you're stuck with it. Sometimes it's just not possible, if you've taken an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to do what you've sworn to do. But here is the very simple reason why you shouldn't lie or exaggerate or dissemble when you're giving evidence to a court. The moment a judge decides that you've not been totally frank in your evidence, there's a good chance that judge isn't going to believe anything else you say, at least not unless it's been independently corroborated. Judges are very forgiving of witnesses who are confused or witnesses who have poor recollection of things, but if you set out to lie in court to a judge, judges don't take that well. And at a time when many court judgments are published online and instantly available, if somebody Googles your name, you could find some very unpleasant things recorded about you in formal court documents. And that's not fun.
Rabbi Wolf is a founder and dean of Spirit Glow Holistic Centre, Australia. He is the author of the best-selling book Practical Kabbalah, Random House, and a producer of extensive libraries of personal growth and meditation training materials. He has lectured in over 500 cities around the globe and has been a keynote speaker at Inter Alia, the American Society of Psychology, the International Congress of Wellness, and the Fortune 500 Convention. He is a graduate in law and psychology and has earned the Semecha from the Chief Rabbi of Israel. A child of Holocaust survivors, he has devoted his life to helping people realize their highest potential, and in so doing, making the world a much better place.
The 10th commandment, not to covet, lo yisach moed, not to covet your neighbor's properties, wife, property, animals. The idea of coveting is an old English word, probably derived from the French coveter, and quite possibly related to the modern covenanter, possibly even originated in the Latin cupiditas. Either way, it means to yearn, to want something strongly. And the Hebrew, sachmoid, coming from the shoresh also of cham, ches, mem, because in Kabbalah, the 2-letter root of the 3-letter shoresh already provides a direction, and cham means warmth, heat. It means somehow the emotions arising in a way which we're yearning for something, and nevertheless, it's not a proper goal of yearning. Now, behind here lies a question of how do our emotions flow? Why would someone yearn for someone else's property? Being envious of somebody, being jealous of somebody, wanting other people's property. Either it's insecurity, or it's a quest for power and control, or it may be a wish to experience the sensuousness of life, someone else's wife. Either way, it's coming from nefesh bahamis, from the wrong place. Nefesh bahamis means our self-oriented drive, security, food, clothing, shelter, and self-actualization, as Maslow noted. And that means we want to preserve ourselves. It's me, I, it's ego. Of course, we should desire to live, but not to the degree that the nefesh bahamis yearns for other people's properties. There's an adequacy. And underneath all this lies the notion of emunah. Do I have the faith that Hashem is providing me exactly what I need at the moment? As Perek says, Ezehu Ashir Hasameach Bechalkei. Who is the rich one? The one who's truly happy with his lot. And that means to be able to have that sense of relationship of closeness with Hashem so that we recognize what I have now is all that I need. Certainly, I can have a bit more, and God forbid, I might have a bit less, but within that particular framework. If God should provide me with more, wonderful. It means Hashem has trust in me in order to handle it correctly and rightly. So the idea of tachmoid, cham, heat of passion, means that I have to adopt a discipline of mind, because every emotion is predicated upon a posture of mind. Mind produces emotions, as the Alter Rebbe notes in Sefer Tanya, Moyach shalit al halev. Any feeling we have is the result of a momentary mind disposition. And even if you think that's not the case, you say, oh no, that emotion just came. Nothing just comes. The microsecond, which you didn't even register in your consciousness, was there. So one has to train one's mind. And the training of one's mind towards emunah, faith in Hashem, is at the core of this commandment, lo sachmei, the 10th commandment. Don't allow your lower order self to yearn for someone else's property, because that means you're inadequate as a person. And you have the capacity to overcome that. And therefore, a very basic law in terms of inner balance and being able to be a proper member of society and also live a life of inner peace.
And with that, we wrap up tonight's program. A huge thank you to all the presenters from around the world for sharing their insightful and thought-provoking insights into each of the 10 Commandments. And a huge thank you to all of you watching for joining us tonight on this incredible experience. As we enter the final moments before Shavuot, which begins on Thursday evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish each and every one of you a healthy, joyous, and meaningful Shavuot. And as Jewish festivals go, not just to commemorate a historical moment, but to truly relive the experience. And this year, with restrictions in place, it's a great opportunity to focus and take a moment and think about what Judaism and Jewish values mean to us, not just as community, but also as individuals. Thank you for joining, and a Chag Sameach.